Trying to find my way, 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 trying to find my way. I'm trying to change me.
My faith is in God alone, beyond a reasonable doubt. This brainstorm pouring rain on your season of drought. Just trying to lay a couple seeds in the mouth. Thanks for listening. You ever get the feeling you was missing?
What up, y'all? It's your hometown hero, Scott Lane, the Black Bruce Wayne, a.k.a. the real Adam Coleman. So, you riding with Tru-ID. I told y'all, man, we're going to keep bringing out the heavy hitters this year. And I'm definitely excited about the guests we have on with us today. Actually, interestingly enough, when I first started going this direction in apologetics, it was the guest that we have today. Was the first person that I came across that was addressing all of this pseudo-scholarship garbage out there concerning Jesus being based on pagan myths. I'm really excited to have her on here today. Maybe we'll dig into that a little bit. And also, I believe she can bring an interesting perspective to the show, given that her testimony involves coming from the atheist perspective over to the truths of Christianity. So, as a matter of fact, I think that's where we're going to start. Please welcome to the show, Mrs. Mary Jo Sharp. How you doing there?
Hey, Adam. It's really good to be on the show.
Glad to have you. Just let our listeners know a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you're up to.
All righty. I'm an assistant professor of apologetics at Houston Baptist University, where I teach apologetics communication. I teach logic. That's a fun one. Mm-hmm. I'm an author with Lifeway Christian Resources, and through them I've produced some apologetics-based Bible studies, like Why Do You Believe That is one of them. Living in Truth is another. Resilient Faith. And I've also contributed to other apologetics works like Come Let Us Reason and In Defense of the Bible. That's kind of who I am and what I do. I started a ministry called Confident Christianity about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And through that ministry, I've been doing a lot of work in just sort of having informal debates, a few formal debates with Muslims, and, training and teaching people on how to make a defense of their belief in God, and how to, argue against the objections coming at them, as well as how to make a case for belief in God.
Right. Actually, I was just listening to one of your debates earlier today as I was preparing for this interview. So I might throw a couple random questions at you from that. There was the one that you did with, and I can't pronounce the name, so I know I'm going to mess it up, but it was in regard to the concepts of women in the Bible and in the Quran, and kind of contrasting those. So I was listening to that today. Very interesting stuff. But let's back a little bit. How did you come to know Christ?
Yeah, that's a good one. I grew up, as you noted, I was an atheist in my background there, mm-hmm. and I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in the Portland metropolitan area. My parents had left church when I was too young to remember, so I didn't really have a church upbringing. They claimed agnosticism. When I talked with them about it, they said, well, we were really sort of agnostics. Mm-hmm. But basically, being raised with agnostics in the Northwest, I was basically atheist, although back then I wouldn't have even known to call myself atheist. Right? I didn't have a belief in God, and I didn't have that church upbringing, and pretty much anything that I knew about Christianity was what I saw in the movies or on TV, so it's pretty shallow.
Yeah, this weird, poorly dressed Bible thumpers just wore nothing but plain clothes kind of a thing? Is that...
Oh, yeah. I remember the Oh God trilogy where God shows up as George Burns smoking a cigar and messing with John Denver's life. Those are the kind of things. And then the other thing, I really didn't know. I had a skepticism of religion in general, and I really didn't know what it was all about, and I didn't trust it, generally speaking, so I didn't trust what church was doing, because I didn't know anything about it. I knew they collected money, and that caused a little bit of distrust for me. So, but as I was getting older, I had been raised on a steady diet of nature and science shows, and my father loved shows like In Search of and Nova, and, just Mutual of Omaha's Wild America. It was very nerdy, but hey, that's my upbringing. Okay. And so as I was getting older, I was beginning to have some big questions about life, like, is this all there is? How do I know that I have any kind of meaning or purpose whatsoever? And about the time that I start having these questions, which is around my senior year of high school, my high school band director, who was a Christian who had never shared his faith with anyone, he gave me a Bible my senior year, and he said before, and this is public school. It's public school, and he now tells this story as well. He said he was a little nervous about he could lose his job over this, but he gave me a Bible, and he said, Mary Jo, when you go off to college, you're gonna have hard questions, and I hope that you will turn to this. So I actually started reading that Bible. It was the NIV one year, and it I had readings for every day of the year, but I started reading it faster than the prescribed readings for every day. I was just getting excited because this was not what was being portrayed through television. It was not what I thought it was. It really shocked me, especially when I got to passages like Luke 1, where he's saying, hey, I've investigated all these things carefully, so that you can know the certainty of the things that you've been taught. That was very different to me than what I had thought of Christianity. So that reading that Bible brought me around to a belief in God, but it wasn't until I went off to college, which is kind of funny because we're worried about our kids going off to college and leaving the faith, and here I am going off to college, and I become a Christian in college after attending a church where I heard a clear presentation of the gospel. That's how I come around to belief in God and trusting in Jesus Christ as my Savior. But by the time I heard the gospel, I had been investigating going off to church on my own, and I guess I was ready. I remember my pastor at the first church saying, if you were to die tonight, would you go to heaven? And I said, no. I was like, no, I would not. And he said, okay, well, what if you were to stand before God? And he said, why should I let you into my heaven? Let's just say you were standing before him. And I said, well, you shouldn't, because I haven't trusted in Jesus as my Savior. He's like, okay. Do you want to do that? And I said, yeah. And the interesting thing is that, I hear a lot of people that have these, really emotional stories that go with their testimony. And mine was just about, investigating and learning about God, and then finally understanding my need for a Savior because I was a sinner, and I hadn't really heard that explained to me. Once I heard it explained to me, I was ready to accept Jesus as my Savior, trust in Him.
That's interesting. I want to ask you a question about that, because I've heard elements, of this story, but just something you just said kind of, piqued my interest right there. Well, two things really. Going back to when the band director hands you this Bible, right? At that point, were you thinking man, this guy's like a weirdo, and I don't know what this is about? Or, was it something, was it kind of like a profound moment where you're like, maybe this is something I need to look into? Kind of, what were your thoughts at that time?
I would like to say or think that it was a profound moment, but I've talked to my band director, and he said he felt like a chump when he was finished. Wow. So I guess my reaction wasn't that great. I don't remember what it was. It was probably like, wow, thanks, or something like that.
It's like, whatever, bro.
Yeah, he was worried I was going to turn him in to the principal or something. And we had a really good relationship, so I don't know. I guess my reaction wasn't all that great to him.
Gotcha. Interesting. So he's probably fearing for his job. It's like, man, I thought I'm doing the Lord's work and I'm going to get fired. That's
wild. Right.
That's wild. So when you finally gave your life to Christ, you said it wasn't like this big emotional thing, and I think that's fascinating because I feel like some people feel like unless it is this big emotional kind of turn your world upside down type of deal immediately, then they haven't converted, or they haven't given their lives over to Christ or something like that. And I think. Would you agree that maybe that could be a stumbling block for somebody, maybe early in their faith? Like, oh, man, I didn't have this big, kind of moment, so maybe it was a real kind of thing? Or?
Yeah, I have my daughter. She was baptized at 6, and she often talks to me about this. She says, I don't have this great testimony of, I was just miserable, and I was doing all this, I was involved with all this sin, and I was just living a horrible, selfish life, and then I came around, and God just so greatly improved my life. She said, I don't have that. And I said, well, what you have is a beautiful story of having known Him very young and very early on and walking with the Lord your whole life, which is a great testimony itself. And I think you're right. I think some people, if they believe that if it's not just this huge emotional experience, that they haven't had a real conversion. But it's different. We have different personalities, and God speaks to us in different ways. And so, it's not that you can't have that. You can obviously have quite an emotional experience in coming around to the Lord, and that would be, fine. It's just not everybody has the same testimony. Not everybody has the same way that they come to Christianity. Yeah.
Right. Actually, I can relate to that because I did gospel rap for over a decade, and
awesome.
For me, I had a great time doing it. But it was interesting is that I would be doing shows with people, and they would give their testimonies, and they're like, "Yeah, man, I got shot 3 times, and I was selling drugs, and I was robbing people, and then I came to Christ, and now I'm not doing that kind of stuff anymore." And then I would go up and it's like, yeah, I just, I came up in a 2-parent home and, was in church all my life. And I just have kind of always been in church, and now I'm here. It just wasn't anything exciting. It's just like, I'm just here. But after a while, I did realize that, especially for parents, I think parents need to see somebody who lives out what they hope that their children will live out. That the children don't have to do all these wild and crazy things, and so it can be encouragement to some. But I ran into the same thing. Getting with the apologetics, this has kind of become my new favorite question. I'm interested in apologetics. A lot of people maybe read the stuff, but what kind of moved you from just being interested in apologetics to taking that step of actually engaging in ministry? Like, what kind of compelled you there?
That's a good question. I actually was not just interested in apologetics. I actually came into the field of apologetics because I began to doubt my own faith about 5-7 years into being a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I had met my husband, and he got called into ministry. So I was a young youth minister's wife, and I just started to see a lot of things in the church that didn't align with the teaching in the Bible. In fact, I saw things that were so bad that I was like, wow, these people who profess the Bible as God's word and the teachings of Jesus as the truth are behaving worse than my atheist and agnostic friends growing up.
Wow.
I had this disconnect. I'm not sure that these people actually believe this is true. And I didn't have a very deep training in my Christianity early on. So I wasn't getting real deep training on the sinner saint factor, what's going on with people. So I started to see that, and I thought, well, this is a contradiction. This is inconsistency, and it started to cause doubt in my life. At first, I would say it was emotional doubt due from watching what was going on, and then that led to the intellectual questioning of, well, what was it that I did back then? What was that experience? How do I know God exists? And I started questioning that salvation experience, and then just the existence of God. And so I went looking for answers to my own questions, because I didn't see anybody in the church handling the subject of doubt. So I had to go look on my own. And it was from that pursuit of answering my own questions that I got involved with apologetics. I didn't know it was a field. I had no idea that apologetics was a thing. I just went looking to answer my questions, and I eventually thought, hey, if I found the answers, and I was like, wow, if I have these questions, I'm sure other people in the church have them, and they're just not talking about it. So I started to teach apologetics in the church, and then found a degree program for apologetics, and then out of that degree program, I started a blog, and that turned into a ministry. I never meant to have this. I was a band teacher, and I was on the path towards becoming a concert, like a maestra.
Wow.
Having my own symphony. Yeah, that was what I wanted to do. So this was a total different path for me.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So you just kind of stumbled into it, so to speak.
Really, I stumbled into it out of doubting my own beliefs.
Wow. Okay. I think you said something really important there too. I mean, for whatever reason, the church doesn't really do too well with doubt. Generally speaking, it's like you're kind of condemned for it, or just kind of pray it away. But few people are encouraged to go ahead and actually study these things out so that they can deal with doubt in an intellectual sort of way. So you went from I guess kind of just finding your own way to now helping other people find their way. And I was just reading up on you a little bit, before the show. And so you're teaching, you said logic you're teaching at Houston Baptist University, is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. That's like a cuss word in some circles of the church. It's just like, we say it's a logic. No, we just believe, but just by faith, brother. They're not really trying to do anything about logic. Why would you say that, us as Christians, how can we benefit in our faith in terms of logic? How is that not a cuss word for the believer?
I love that. How is it not a cuss word for the believer? That's awesome. Yeah, I understand that. I know I've met a lot of people who have left the faith who say things like they asked a question that was hard and they got told, well, you just don't have enough faith. You know, like there's no passages in the Bible calling us to reason or calling us towards understanding and wisdom, which is all the way through the Bible, by the way. Sure. So I think it's funny that you say that. Yeah, it's important to understand logic, and logic being just it's a orderly way of thinking. It provides structure to thought. So it's important for us to understand logic, because the ability to reason is a gift from God. It's part of being made in His image. Mm-hmm. So therefore, it should be developed as part of becoming more like Christ. Growing in wisdom and knowledge is commanded throughout the Scripture. Like I said, Proverbs 4:5-7 says, "Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forsake wisdom, and she'll protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you." Mm-hmm. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, though it costs you all you have. Get understanding. Wow. Though it costs you all you have, right? Get an understanding. Not like, hey, in your spare time, if you're able. You know, wisdom will watch over you, but you have to desire her. You have to love her. And I think that's why God He invites the sinner to come reason with Him, because He's the author of reason. He's the giver of truth. And you can see this with Paul, the Apostle Paul. He's reasoning with the men in the synagogues and in the marketplaces, all through Acts. So it's part of who we are as Christians, but, you know, how does it help us? I think that was your second part of what you were asking.
Sure, yeah. How does it help the believer? Yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's a part of who we are, like it's part of becoming Christ-like. But then, since it does help us to organize our thoughts, it can aid a person in the discovery of truth, right? And that's what we're all after. We want to know truth. And logic helps us to uncover contradictions, incoherencies, irrational statements, and beliefs. Even if we're not making formalized arguments, because you say logic, people are like, "Oh man, that just sounds philosophical. It sounds like a formal argument. I'm not dealing with that. I'm not doing that." But you can use what's called like the basic errors in reasoning, the fallacies. You can use those to find where your own thinking or the thinking of the person with whom you're talking is faulty. And we, man, Adam, we're using fallacies almost every day. It's almost every day. I would say every day, but I can't prove that. So, but I think most.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but you said something really powerful there. So, can you maybe give a snippet of how can we as believers maybe point out fallacies in somebody else's argumentation to dismantle that? Because I think that I'm going somewhere with that, but I just kind of want to maybe if you could hit on that right quick.
Well, I'm not sure where you're going, but I know we can. I know a couple of things. When we know what the errors in reasoning are, common errors in logic, when we start using them on ourselves first, right? You use them so that you, first of all, aren't making straw men of other people's arguments, or you're not creating, you're not leading people towards untruth. So you use them on yourself first, and from that, then you begin to outwork that into your life, where you're pointing it out in another person's life. When you hear these inconsistencies that someone else says, which there's plenty of inconsistencies and contradictions that are being said. You can see them all over social media, let alone just in the person that's right in front of you, who's spewing the same mantra that we see in social media or hear in social media.
Sure.
So you can, once you learn them, once you know, get a basic grasp on some of these errors in reasoning, which they're not all that difficult to understand, then you start implementing them into your whole life. So first with you, so that you're not the person leading people away from truth and making errors. And then using them to discuss belief in God, where you see that there are bad arguments being made. There's a lot of bad arguments out there.
Right.
And a lot of times people are led astray from the faith due to bad thinking. And they don't even know it. They don't even know it, Adam.
Yeah, and that's the crazy. And I'm glad you said that. And I know we're going off script here a little bit, and I apologize. But you just kind of brought some things I think will really be helpful here. So let's give a concrete example, because I want the listeners to really hear where I'm going with this. Can you talk a little bit about the genetic fallacy?
Oh, that's perfect. That was the first one I was thinking of.
Great.
So you've got this fallacy called genetic fallacy, and it means that you're declaring an argument false or invalid due to the source of the argument, rather than on the validity or the logic of the argument itself. So let me give you an example of that. I've been told on my Facebook ministry page, Confident Christianity, I've been told that I'm not to be trusted in an argument because I'm a Christian apologist. So whatever argument I was making, let's say I'm making the argument against Jesus as the pagan, one of those pagan gods. This guy came on and said, you can't trust me because I'm a Christian apologist. Wow. That's genetic fallacy.
Right.
You're blaming the source rather than dealing with whatever argument I made. And this happens a lot to Christians, and I don't think they understand that. Like, somebody will say, you can't trust him because he's a Christian. Or you can't trust his argument because he's coming from a Christian perspective. And we do that in politics all the time, by the way. So they'll label, Democrat or Republican is the reason that you can't trust what they're arguing.
Right,
that's genetic fallacy.
All day. So now I'm going to bring it home, a little bit here. So one of the things that we hear, particularly from the conscious community, whether it be through, memes on the Facebook page or YouTube scholars trying to debunk Christianity, all the time we hear that African Americans today ought not to be Christians because Christianity was imposed upon slaves during slavery. And when you think about it, that's a classic example of the genetic fallacy, right? Because regardless of how, we today came, first of all, it's not even true. But even if it were true, whatever happened during, the 14 to the, 1800s has no bearing on whether Jesus existed and rose again in the first century AD, But so many people get led astray by that.
Yeah, and it's the problem it's a great problem that you pointed out in that it is genetic in that the source of, whoever was proclaiming Christianity at the time, they were problematic because of the slave trade, right? So they were proclaiming Christianity, but they also had the slave trade. So you have a problematic source there. And that didn't make Christianity false. That's where the genetic fallacy comes into play. Here's an example of how that. Let's move it away from the really super controversial one and go over to another example. Yeah. So if I were to say, hey, you can't trust what doctors and nurses say about smoking being bad for your health and leading to cancer because the doctors and nurses you saw outside your hospital were smoking that day, right? That's the same kind of problematic thinking. It still may be true. The medical truth about smoking is probably still true, whether or not the people are adhering to that medical truth at that moment.
Right.
And that's the problem with the one that you brought up. Now, on the other side of that, there is an experiential problem in that the people who were supposed to be showing and demonstrating the value of a human being, that all human beings are equally made in the image of God, were the people violating that at the highest level of violation by taking away human freedom.
Absolutely.
So, that created a huge contradiction right there. So I do see merit in that part of the argument versus it can have a genetic fallacy attached to it, though. So you have to be careful how you're arguing.
I agree. Yeah, and I think that's, I think what's helpful is when you can address both sides of that. We can address the fallacious nature of that argument and then also address the emotional content of it that goes along with it, because there are two sides to it, But I don't want to get too hung up on that. In terms of the objections that you come across to Christianity, what would you say are some of the most common errors, like maybe 2 or 3 common errors that that folks kind of throw at you?
Yeah, well, we already discussed genetics. That's one of them. A lot of times we get ad hominem, which are attacking the person rather than addressing their argument. And then genetic falls under the ad hominem category. But so if you get, for example, you get called a backwoods, ignorant, intolerant, bigoted Christian, and that's why you disagree with me about sexual morality, because you're backwoods, ignorant, intolerant, and bigoted. So that's a error in reasoning. That's not helping anybody get to the truth, right? Mm-hmm. That's just an attack on the person. So ad hominem. Another one I encounter a lot is the straw man fallacy. I encounter this a lot in media because memes, like internet memes, are just rife with doing the straw man fallacy. Okay. Mm-hmm. So straw man fallacy is when you create a weak or ridiculous version of the argument in order to make it more easy to attack. So, for example, I constantly see people changing the arguments for belief in God to something completely ridiculous so that it's easier to attack and tear down.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I see that all the time, actually. Rather than engaging God for who we're claiming him to be, it kind of reminds me of kind of the Richard Dawkins kind of stuff. He's constantly making stuff up and then saying, "Oh yeah, this is what Christians believe." And it's like, no, not really.
No, yeah, I keep getting told that well, you're a Jewish zombie, referring to Jesus, right. That. That you believe in, and your caveman blood magic. And I'm like, what is that? I don't even know what to do with that. That's such an unthoughtful engagement with what we believe.
That's a new one. You said caveman blood magic?
Yeah, that was exact terms used with me.
Wow. Okay. That's the first time I've heard. That's pretty creative. I have to give him that. I've never heard that one before.
That's creative, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's creative.
Wow. I mean, so when you meet a person like that, do you take time to engage them on the fallacy? Like, do you kind of walk them through why their thinking is false there, or do you kind of how do you approach that when you run into these sorts of things?
Oh yeah, I just tell them. I say, hey, I would love to have a conversation with you, and I would love to address any arguments that you may have. But this is an error in reasoning. Like if you're going, so let's use the straw man one. If you're going to attack Christianity because you think it's a Jewish zombie, well, that's such a weak and ridiculous version of what I'm saying that I can't engage with that argument because that's not what I believe. And I'll tell them that. If you want to engage with the God that I actually profess, if you want to engage that belief system, if you want to start to talk about the doctrines of the Christian tradition, things that we've believed for 2,000 years, right, and formalized, then yeah, sure, I will still engage you. And a lot of times what I'll get is more ad hominem thrown at me and told that I'm an idiot and that I'm, they'll say, well, I use logic and evidence and reason. I said, well, okay, then use it. So use it.
Right. Hold them to it. That's right. It's interesting because I feel like maybe if we were taught philosophy in high school or something like that, then maybe just as a society we wouldn't be prone to such, bad thinking. But I guess philosophy is kind of like this weird otherly type thing that you may or may not take in college for most people, I think. Does that sound
I think we still think of philosophers as like wearing black turtlenecks and black berets and smoking cigarettes and drinking and just saying like the weirdest esoteric things possible. But that's not what it's about, right?
So that's not you. That's not you when you're in class. You don't show up with the beatnik type of deal, or
no, not at all. No, we have a great time in class. We tend to take some of the presidential debates and the commercials that we see, and we break those down practically so they can learn some of these errors in reasoning.
I bet that is a lively time, actually. Especially, this last campaign season was pretty heated, so I can imagine y'all probably had a good time with that.
Oh yeah, we did. The students become very disappointed in whoever was their candidate. Like they'll rally around a candidate, and then they'll say like, "Wow, they just used so many errors in reasoning. This is so much rhetoric that I couldn't even." I just found myself getting really upset that they weren't telling me the issues. They weren't telling me what they were actually going to do. Right. Instead, I got all this rhetoric, and that started to really change their view of, a lot of times they start to rally around a candidate. This is our candidate. If you're this kind of person, this is who your candidate is. And what it did is it really made them stop and think, is that really my candidate? Is that really what I believe? Do I really want to support this? And it was quite eye-opening for them.
Interesting. So in dealing with Christians, because you teach at a Christian university, do you find, is it like pulling teeth, when you're kind of instructing folks, about logic, or is it something that they're looking to embrace, or maybe even in, churches? I mean, do you find it's something that people are ready to accept, or is it still kind of like that stigma that it's this otherly type of a thing?
I still find it stigmatized in that people, they say things like, well, I just have a simple faith. And they don't actually want to engage at deeper levels, even though the scriptures keep telling them to go deeper. They keep being Paul's admonitions, author of Hebrews, all constantly saying, go deeper. I want to teach you hard things, but you're still on like milk, and you should be teachers of this stuff. So I find a resistance to it, and quite honestly, I don't know. I haven't done all the studies on it, but that could be due to the advance of technology and wealth in our culture, and how we have access to so much, entertainment and all these pleasures, that we've become a bit more shallow than we were. I don't, like I said, I don't have the statistics on that or the studies, but I think there's a book out called "Amusing Ourselves to Death," and I forgot who that author is, but there's a great book by Alan Bloom called "The Closing of the American Mind," and he really treats this issue back from the 1980s. He already saw it coming.
Interesting. And I think it does make people more vulnerable, when you look at the social media world, because there's so much information out there. But I think people have a hard time deciphering between what's reliable information and what's unreliable information, because they're not able to kind of pick out some of these things. Would you say that's accurate? I mean, what would you say?
Oh yeah, I'm always having people at conferences. They're always saying "How do I find a good source?" And oh my gosh, yeah. See, that's where we've kind of failed ourselves in the public school system. In that, and I'm a product of the public school system, and I taught in the public schools. They have their good and they have their bad, but sometimes when the kids come out of there and they don't know how to find a good reference. They don't know what a quality source is. If you're gonna talk about philosophy, you need to find a philosopher who's writing on this, and he's getting vetted by putting his work in journals, and people are peer reviewing his work, or her work. So yeah, we don't even know that much. That has this been tested? Who's been vetting this person by reviewing their material, and then has it survived? Nowadays it's anybody with a blog, anybody who can tweet. You can get Google authority just because you put out the most stuff, and you get the most eyeballs on your page.
Google authority.
And that's
I like that. It's interesting. Yeah. Google authority. It's very.
You appear higher up in the Google hierarchy of what appears on your page. Oh, the first one must be the most vetted one, right?
Interesting. I haven't even thought about that. But you're right. I mean, if somebody gives me a history book and it's like 300 pages, and I look in the back and there's no bibliography, it's probably not a reliable source. That actually happened. Yeah. There's a guy at the gym. He's telling me the Christianity is false and all this kind of. He said, "Man, check out this book." It was like this 300 page book, and there was no bibliography.
Wow.
I'm like, bro, that's not gonna work, man. How do you know where he's getting his information from? Has he done his homework and so forth? But this guy was just convinced, of this resourceless source that he had, Speaking of books, I'm looking at one right now called A New Kind of Apologist, and it's a book that you contributed to. I think did it just come out last year? Is that right? I want to say.
I believe so. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. I don't even remember when my own books come out. Right.
You just got so much stuff out there. You're just killing.
Yeah.
You're killing the game.
Last year. You're right.
Gotcha. Could you maybe give a snippet of some of the things that you talked about in that chapter?
Yeah, my chapter was on why more women should study apologetics, and it was interesting to me when I started doing apologetics that we needed to encourage women to do apologetics. I'd never thought of that. I never looked at the books I was reading and was like, "Oh, drat! Here's another one by a dude." I never. Right. That just never crossed my mind. I was just so glad to have answers, and. So I started to notice that women weren't doing as much apologetics when I was in classes and when I would go speak at conferences, and none of the women would know what apologetics was about. So I actually started like a little grassroots thing here in Texas, where I was going into a lot of churches, and actually most of my early talks were just building the case for why women should study apologetics. So I was just doing why apologetics. And not specific to women, just why apologetics, but I was doing them in women's ministries. So the chapter kind of centers on three basic reasons why. Of course, they're not the only ones, but this is sort of where I landed. Mm-hmm. And that was to answer doubt. More women should become these like case makers for Christianity because they need to answer doubt. Doubt's very common. It's very common, whether or not we're talking about it. Mm-hmm. And many people have doubts in different forms. So it's an important thing that we address this because, you know, life experiences, things don't go the way that we think they should. And so we start to question God, or we have a brush with great evil. And we don't know how to reconcile that with God. And this is what's going on, you know, in women's lives as well as others. But, you know, or exposure to bad arguments. Women get exposed to, you know, some guy who gave them a 200-page book with no bibliography.
Exactly. Right.
So there's a lot of reasons that women are having these doubts. But what I found was that women needed a safe environment to speak up about their doubt. Or otherwise, they're just going to kind of not talk about it. They need a place where they're free from ridicule, suspicion, and rejection in order to say, hey, here's where I don't understand something about God. You know, how can he be good when my child died at 5 or 15 or whatever? That doesn't seem very good. So, you know, they need a place where they need a community of believers who can focus on identifying, you know, these sort of issues and dealing with them. So that was one reason. It was that women, they have doubt and they need these answered. So they too need to engage in the answering of their doubt. I also had that it was to build confidence because as you're answering your doubts, you're starting to build confidence up in what you believe.
Yeah.
And that's huge because you're going to, you know, as a woman, you're going to pass that along. You're going to pass it along to your friends, to your kids, to your husband.
Right.
And what I find right now, especially right now, even more so than when I wrote the chapter, is that a lot of times Christians are mired in the reactiveness to culture. So they're not using their energy and their time to answer these deep spiritual truths so that they can grow and mature in their faith. They're kind of mired in all this reactiveness. So they need to be answering their doubts to build up their confidence in Christ so that no matter what's going on in their world, no matter how politics changes or whatever, that they begin to build confidence in the God that they profess.
Right.
So it's to build confidence, and then the final point I made was to change lives. There's a book that I teach in one of my classes at HBU called the Dragonfly. It's called the Dragonfly Effect, and it follows like social movements and how you get social movements going. But they say that there's 3 basic human needs for establishing self-worth. There's competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And apologetics serves all 3 needs by providing women with the competency in handling doctrines and arguments of their faith, which gives women autonomy to discuss these beliefs in any situation and provides a means of communicating with the community in the search for truth. So it provides that relatedness. So that begins to change their life. And so those were the 3 areas that I centered around on why more women need to study apologetics, was to answer doubt, build their confidence, and then change their life.
That's good, man. That's good. You know, apologetics is not a guy thing. You know, it's definitely
not a guy thing.
Not a guy thing. You know. Okay, cool. So I've held you like for definitely over the time where I told you I was going to. But can you just maybe take a second and let folks know kind of where you are on the net? You know, are there any websites or books that you are promoting right now? How can they get a hold of your stuff?
Yeah. Oh, well, first of all, I'd love to let them know that at Houston Baptist University, we got a master's degree in apologetics. And it's a really cool degree because you can do it either on campus with us or you can do it online with us. And we got 2 separate tracks, which are really neat. We have a philosophical track, and it just it explores the arguments in of themselves, like what are the arguments and who's engaged them over time in history. And then we have this cultural track, which is engaging the arguments right in their cultural home of like film, TV, literature, music. And so I love that track, that you engage the arguments in where they appear in the culture. So I want to make sure people know that if they are interested in the gaining more information on how to defend their faith, that they can go to hbu.edu hbu.edu/MAA. That's a great place to go to get information. If you want to connect with my ministry personally, I have the ministry Confident Christianity. You can go to that website, just confidentchristianity.com, and I try to do weekly articles on apologetics issues. Mm-hmm. And you can sign up for my monthly newsletter. You can keep up with my speaking events. So that's a great place to go. And then I mentioned I have some books that you can start with. Why Do You Believe That is a great apologetics Bible study, and it introduces apologetics through the means of conversation, like having conversations about God. Sort of introduces the apologetics issues along the way. They can also do, that's a study, so it's like a 6 to 7 week study for small groups or individuals. They can do Living in Truth, which was the follow-up study. And the subtitle of this one, Confident Conversation in a Conflicted Culture.
Wow.
Okay. It's just perfect for right now. Great alliteration, right?
But can you say it 3 times fast? That's the real question.
That's right. 10 times fast, even.
Right.
But that's a great one for getting into the issues of our day, and it goes deeper into problem of evil and into what's holding us back from being able to share the gospel in our current culture and those kind of things. So it's a really good one. I've written a book, Defending the Faith, Apologetics and Women's Ministry. So that's a great one, and I've contributed to others, which I mentioned at the start of the show, like Come Let Us Reason, In Defense of the Bible, a new kind of apologist where I'm either talking about the pagan myth theory or I'm talking about, like a new kind of apologist, the women's, one more women should study.
Awesome. Well, hey, I appreciate you. There's a lot of stuff out there for folks to get a hold of, and I'll definitely be checking out, and I advise all my listeners to as well. Just want to say, hey, I love you guys out there. There's another episode in the books. Peace.